Okay. You know what? We didn't need these anyway. This video is gonna be a doozy. My notes, I have so many notes for this movie, which I was not anticipating. I didn't think I'd feel that passionate about this movie, at least in this way. I have a lot to say about Antlers, and I almost debated just putting it in my monthly recap because it's been out for so long. But because it's been out for so long, I'm going to talk about a lot of spoilers for this movie because I want to give you specifics. I want to break down this movie and tell you why I think it's bad. I didn't like this movie. I don't think I'm in the minority. I think there are a lot of people who have issue with this movie, so that's a little comforting, but I do get nervous when I have like really negative things to say about a movie because I tend to get eaten alive a little bit. So bear with me. We're gonna talk about my opinions. I'm not gonna, hold back my opinions. I want to share them with you. And instead of doing like a really vague rant without spoilers, trying to avoid spoiling the movie, I'm gonna get into specifics and tell you exactly why I think this is a bad movie and why I don't like it. I think that's one of the reasons why people get mad at my rants or my negative reviews is because I don't tell you very specifically as to why I didn't like it. So this one, I will be going very in depth as to why I don't like this movie. I think the movie's been out long enough that a majority of people have already seen it who have wanted to see it. But just in case, I will have a small, general spoiler-free review in the beginning of this video, and spoilers start at this point in time, and I will warn you again before we talk about spoilers. But just in case you haven't seen it yet, I will share just some general thoughts about this movie and a couple things of why I didn't like it. So Antlers is set in Oregon and follows a teacher who discovers that one of her students is acting a little strange and realizes that he has a dark secret living at home. This has Carrie Russell and Jesse Plemons as the leads, and they play brother and sister. Jesse is playing the role of the sheriff in this story. Now, if you've been watching my channel for a while, you know how excited I was for Antlers, and it's been probably over 2 years that I've been excited for it. So Guillermo del Toro is a producer on this movie, and if you know anything about me, you know he is one of my favorite horror creators of all time. So that's one of the main reasons why I was excited for it. Granted, I know he's just a producer on it, so it's not going to be like a lot of his other movies, and Scott Cooper is the director on Antlers. Personally, I don't really recognize a lot of other Scott Cooper's works, so I don't really have anything to go on based on I don't know his style or anything like that. So let's firstly start with what I liked about this movie, because I don't want to go into this being super negative because this definitely has some redeeming qualities. It just wasn't enough for me to recommend this movie or to say that it's good. Firstly, atmosphere setting. Beautiful. It was gorgeous, obviously. It takes place in Oregon. However, a majority of the filming took place in British Columbia, Canada, so you don't actually get to see Oregon, even though it's very reminiscent of Oregon and its weather. I think that is honestly the best part of this movie, which isn't necessarily a bad thing that that's the best part, is the atmosphere and the setting, because that can really save a movie. This is like a dark, brooding, ominous, atmospheric type movie, and the setting just plays into that. When there was gore, it was really good. So there isn't, I don't want to say there isn't too much, because there are some scenes with some really, really good gore, and whoever did the special effects on this and the practical effects was fantastic. There's one particular death scene that I think is the most effective, and I will go more in depth on that and some more positives later in the spoilers. Also, I'm pretty sure they used some audio mechanics in one particular scene. Again, I'll go more in depth later, but they use that technique with the audio to kind of make you feel uncomfortable. There was like this pulsating noise in one of the scenes that kind of added to the discomfort and the tension of the scene. So I thought that was really effective. And that whole scene entails the best death scene and the best audio and everything going on. Gore, everything. So that ended up being the best scene in the entire movie. And that's about it. Those are its redeeming qualities in my opinion. That's it. That's what I liked about this movie. The performances were great. I do want to, give credit there. I think Jesse Plemons was the best actor in this. I like him anyway. I'm kind of biased. But I like his acting anyway. He always does this like type of acting that makes it feel like a real human being, so you couldn't really tell that he was acting. Now, without getting super specific yet, so still spoiler free, let's get into some of its issues. It is one of the most predictable horror movies I have ever seen. It follows a very familiar formula for horror, and that isn't always a bad thing because, you know, when you watch a zombie movie or a slasher movie, you know what you're gonna get out of it. So I did go into this thinking it was going to be super unique and original and, you know, not predictable, but it ended up being very, very predictable, and to a point where I lost enjoyment because of that, because I always knew who was gonna die. They set it up every single time to make it obvious when someone was going to die. And like I said, it's not always a bad thing when it's predictable, but then we have to save it with other things. Make it more fast-paced, maybe have more disturbing deaths, so even if I know they're gonna die, make their death really, really cool. And that's one of the things that I was really expecting out of this. Based on the trailers, I was expecting an atmospheric horror movie that was very disturbing. It kind of looked messed up in the trailer, and I didn't really get any of that. It just felt very generic. I think one of the issues with Antlers is it really struggled to be more symbolic than it was, and it tried too hard to be one of those atmospheric type disturbing horror movies, and it just did not work for me. I think if Del Toro had more of a hand in this and they used more of his style, it could have worked, because this movie has some of the most potential I've seen in any horror movie this year, but it ended up being one of the most generic horror movies that I've seen this year. I think that this movie is just a great example of it trying to be something it's not. So it's trying to be deep, it's trying to be atmospheric, it's trying to be symbolic, and it's trying to be disturbing with some of the scenes, and it was just trying a little too hard, and it didn't land. Personally, I think it fails at almost all of that. Obviously, the setting and atmosphere is a given. It's great, but that is not enough. I could kind of tell that they were trying to make an artsy movie, and I don't like when I can tell that their intention was that, because you could just tell that they tried too hard on this one. Okay, so the characters, although the acting was good, like I mentioned, the characters are probably some of my biggest critiques of this entire movie. A lot of my critiques have to do with the characters. It felt like their goals weren't really fleshed out, like they didn't have a purpose, like they were just kind of reacting to everything that was happening to them, and I didn't know their intentions. Like I didn't know much. I just don't think their intentions were ever fully explained, and so I was left guessing and assuming a lot of this movie, and I don't want to have to do that. It just kind of felt like a lot of the characters' decisions were just there to move the plot along and not intentional or purposeful. Again, I will give specifics in spoilers. I just don't want to say anything now. You know I talk a lot about getting spoon-fed in horror movies. It's one of my biggest pet peeves when it comes to horror movies. I don't want you to directly tell me anything. However, this movie is like the opposite of that. I didn't get enough for me to make the right assumptions. I made wrong assumptions throughout this movie, and maybe that's just me. Maybe it's me interpreting certain things wrong, but I just felt like we didn't get enough information. I also felt like the timeline was really disjointed, and there were some questionable like timings of different scenes and like cutting to different scenes that just didn't make sense to me. It's not like it had to be well balanced, because it's not like this movie is fast paced or slow paced. It's just kind of like in the middle without a huge payoff, in my opinion. So I could probably stay vague in a lot of my other critiques of this movie, but I really want to get into specifics and get into spoilers for this movie. So if you have not seen it yet, beware, there are spoilers ahead, but let's talk specifically, very specifically, what I did not like about Antlers. So the first thing I want to address in spoilers, and I wasn't sure whether to put this in spoilers or not, because I knew that this movie was a Wendigo movie going in. Like I knew that because of the trailers. I just kind of assumed, and I think I might have seen an article before it was released, because it's been out or announced for 2 years, so I thought everyone knew, but just in case I'm putting it here in spoilers. So it's a Wendigo movie, which is a great idea for a horror movie, right? But we get such minimal lore when it comes to the Wendigo. We have one scene where we have one Native American explaining the lore behind the Wendigo, and then he's just irrelevant. Like, he's not important anymore. We just throw away his character. This is becoming a new trope in horror, I'm noticing, where we have a storyline that has to do with lore or cultural stories, and the cast of the movie is primarily white people, so then they bring on someone to explain to the white people what the actual lore is, and then they're just a throwaway character, and they're only there to help the white heroes move along the story. The Curse of La Llorona does this, The Forest does this, and arguably, possibly, people are gonna get mad. Every time I talk about politics or culture or like, people get mad. Anyway, they just out themselves and block. But arguably, the original Candyman kind of does this as well, because the lead is a white woman and she has explained the lore and like the story of Candyman from people from Cabrini Green. But now also we have Antlers that does this, and this makes me angry. Like, it made me angry to watch, because I would have honestly preferred maybe a period piece where we have a Wendigo movie and it follows a full Native American cast. How cool would that be? The lore is really interesting, and there's so much potential for horror when it comes to the Wendigo, but we get none of that. Like, we get we get minimal of it, and we get very minimal like native culture in this as well. Now, I do want to point out that Scott Cooper worked with Professor Grace Dillon, who is said to be the authority on the Wendigo in North America. So she contributed her expertise into making this movie so that the lore would be accurate, which I suppose is better than nothing, but I don't feel like the actual lore behind it is what we got in Antlers. I feel like it was a very toned down, like mild version of it, just for the sake of making a horror movie. Again, a lot of lost potential there. I appreciate Scott Cooper recognizing as a white man that he cannot accurately portray an indigenous story like this, and so he had professionals come on to help, and like actual natives to, you know, help him with this story. But he says in an interview that the mistreatment of Native Americans is very important to him. But I have to question that, because why would you only then cast one Native person in your movie about a Native American lore, story, mythological? Why just the one? The Native character he did cast, Graham Greene, who plays Sheriff Stokes, is a throwaway character. The one Native American, you know, person that's cast for this movie is just only there to explain it to the main characters. He has no important role, he has no relevant role. I would have liked to see him have a hand in it, because he's supposed to be the expert on the Wendigo in the movie, so why wouldn't he then talk to other natives or like, you know, be a part in defeating the Wendigo? He's just kind of like, all right, so that's the Wendigo, good luck. And then he's literally never seen again. So the Wendigo lore says, according to Professor Grace Dillon, it takes on many forms, but first and foremost, it's a spirit. It's the spirit of devastation, decay, and addiction, which tells me it's supposed to be symbolic. The Wendigo is the pain and misery that lives in all of us. Eventually it escapes, but you can never escape it. So I'm left to assume that the director kind of wanted this movie to be a giant metaphor, maybe for addiction, because we know that the main character has some issues with alcohol. We just have like a couple scenes that are like the same scene shown like 3 times of her almost buying alcohol. So we know she's an alcoholic, or was an alcoholic, I don't know. And then we also see the brother taking pills occasionally, but that wasn't really fleshed out enough for us to know what the pills are for. He just kind of takes them at points of anxiety. So are they just like Xanax? Are they just like mental health pill, like for his mental health? Are they like, is he an addict? We don't really get that explanation. So I'm not sure if the symbolism was intentional or not. I don't think it was executed very well because it wasn't obvious. So we're gonna move on from the lack of culture in this movie and talk about some of the other technical things and story things that I just did not like about it. You don't see enough of the deaths. I wanted to see a lot more gore. Like I said, I was expecting like a disturbing horror movie, and this did not deliver. There was one death that was pretty good, and then that was it. A lot of the deaths are actually shown, or they're not shown, they're off camera. We do see the bodies afterwards, which are great. Those bodies looked fantastic. I wanted to see what actually happened to them, though. Like, we get to see the Wendigo, like, kill people. I want to see that. However, when we do see it kill people, it's kind of just they're all killed the same way, so maybe we can just, like, assume. But you see the bodies, and it's like, they weren't just impaled like the other people. So what's going on? This is why the best scene in the entire movie is the principal scene, the principal's death, when she goes to the house of the child, and, you know, she's stupid, obviously, which we'll get to why every character in this movie is stupid. But she is going through the house, and then she finds, you know, the dad, who's kind of possessed with the spirit of the Wendigo. He's not fully turned yet. And then as soon as he feeds on her, on human flesh, that's when the Wendigo is released, and he, you know, it breaks out of his body. That was the coolest scene. That was the scene where we have the audio mechanics going on. We have the audio effects to make us feel uncomfortable and tense, and it was just really cool. We get to see her death on camera, actually, and that was really nice. It kind of felt like a zombie movie for half of it before the Wendigo showed up, because it's just the dad kind of sick and he looks like a zombie. There were some story things that I just wish were explained a little bit better, like why was the Wendigo afraid of a flare? Why did it want to go back to the mine? I don't know if these things were explained, but if the Wendigo is like some powerful spirit, I'm not sure why it would be scared of a flare, you know? Also, can we explore literally anyone else's backstory? Like, I'll take anyone's backstory. Please, can you explain it a little bit better? I think he was trying to not explain it too much and for us to make those connections, but I felt so lost half the time and wished that they went a little bit more in detail. I think if we just had like a little bit more explanation, some of the story would have made more sense. Like, why doesn't the boy seek out help in the beginning when his dad and his brother are like possessed? Why doesn't he call anyone or like do anything? I have to assume, again, I'm assuming, because we don't know, because his dad made meth, he probably was told a lot in his life, don't call the cops for anything, right? So that, I have to assume, is what happened and why he didn't call anyone. The dad probably too told him at some point, don't call anyone, just feed me dead skunks and I'll be okay. The main character's story, why'd her mom die? I thought both her parents died when she was young. Didn't find that out until later, that her dad just recently died. We know there's abuse there. We see a very disturbing scene. I didn't like that personally. I felt like it was out of place. I honestly assumed that she killed her dad. I don't know why I assumed this. I just jumped to the darkest thing, right? That she killed her dad, became an alcoholic, and that's why her brother resented her. But no, her brother just resented her because she left after her mom died and after she was abused. So I guess that's the story. That's it. Again, what were the brother's pills? Could we have this scene where it kind of explains that a little bit more? Like maybe he sees the dead cop, his partner, dead, and he has like a panic attack or something and he needs his pills. Or were they like, you know, was he an addict? I don't know what the pills were. I have to assume so much about the story, especially the side plot, but then not really, because it's not really relevant to a lot of the story, like the main Wendigo kind of story. It doesn't matter. They don't feel connected. And I think they're supposed to be, because I think it's supposed to be a giant metaphor for their past and their story and their addiction and things like that. I don't know. Oh my God, I still have like a page and a half of notes and I've been filming for 30 minutes. I have so much to say. Anyway, moving on. So I mentioned the timeline was a little bit disjointed, and I'll explain kind of what I mean. There was like a scene where we'd cut to and from, and then what happens in the interim. Like, it's not really explained what's going on in between timelines, if that makes sense. So she's going down the stairs when the first cop is killed, and then that scene lasts for like minutes, right? When the first cop dies in the shed, and then she's walking out the door in the next scene, and it's like it would have taken her 10 seconds to go down those stairs. So I'm not sure what the timeline was, and it just felt off. None of the characters ever exhibited fear. They never were afraid. And I feel like that's very essential for the viewer to kick in our empathy to then feel afraid. Think about when you watch a horror movie, if they're scared, you feel more scared. If they're like being a badass and they don't care, we don't care. I mean, there was some scenes where they like had a reaction to things, but then it like dissipated really, really quickly, or they would just react to the smell of a body instead of the fact that the body was ripped open. Like, that's horrific. Why are you not reacting to that? It just made for there to be like so little tension in so many of the scenes. Like I felt fear from the teacher, again, best scene in the movie. But beyond that, I didn't really feel fear from any of the characters. It just felt like such low stakes, you know? That's kind of what it felt like. Like when the cop saw his partner dead in the shed, he just didn't really react how you would probably react to seeing your friend dead. Like, again, show him having a panic attack then. That would have been interesting. It would have felt like an emotional connection to him, but instead he just kind of like stares at it. I don't know. The main character in the very end, when she's battling a whole freaking Wendigo, shows no fear. She's just a badass now all of a sudden. Like, okay. Like, I get it. She suffered trauma. She's now so protective of the children. So she's like willing to not be afraid, I guess, and like sacrifice herself almost for these kids. So maybe it was her trauma response kicking in and she just was numb to it. I don't know. Again, we don't know. But also that whole scene, the whole climax of this movie was so disappointing. The funniest part of this movie, I was literally laughing because she's blindly firing a gun in the mine where there are children. And I'm like, she's gonna shoot a fucking kid. Like, why are you just blindly shooting in the dark in a mine? She's a teacher. She cares about kids. You'd think she'd be like calling out to them. Not that they'd be able to hear you anymore because all of your eardrums were blown out by this 5 shots that you fired in the mine. You're all deaf now, okay? I hate that whole thing with horror movies where they fire guns and like no one reacts. It's like, do we forget how loud guns are? Like you can hear them a mile away. Like they're pretty loud. Can we address that? Like how cool would it have been in that scene if she fires it once and everyone's like holding their ears and it's like ringing and they do some cool audio effects and they're like, oh, not doing that again. Or like paralyzes the Wendigo for a minute. They could have explored the gun aspect, but no, she's just firing at will like it's nothing, like it's not loud, like there's not children in there. Like another issue I have a lot of issues, can you tell? We were told way too early how to actually kill the Wendigo. I feel like there should have been a scene where they attempted to kill it, cut off its head or a limb or stabbed it or something, shot it in the face, and then it just miraculously survives, right? And then you find out later, oh, you have to rip the heart out. We find all of that information out at the very beginning because the Native American character was only around for a second, so they had to get it all in that scene, otherwise we'd have to bring him back, and that just was not okay, apparently. It just made the ending really anticlimactic because you know she's gonna rip the heart out, like you know, and it'd be one thing if it was already wounded and we tried that and you know, there was like more to it, but it was just so anticlimactic. To me, it felt like the setting and the monster choices weren't even relevant in the end because the climax felt like a generic monster fight where we have like this badass girl and she's like shooting a gun and like can just fight this Wendigo now with no fear. So like none of it felt important anymore. Also absolutely hated how the Wendigo had the man's face on it. I felt like that was their attempt to be disturbing. Like, ooh, he has the dad's face on his face or on the Wendigo's face. And it's like, I didn't like that. I didn't like it. Why is his face on it? Like, another thing that really bothered me in this, we're gonna go back a second, they used the same scene, the same shot 3 times. So we have the cop enter the shed, right? And then there's like a big jump scare. That one got me. That was the only jump scare that really was effective for me, was the shed, the first cop who dies. And then we have the second cop coming in the shed, right? And then, oh, the Wendigo's behind him too. And then we have the main character coming in the shed and she's like in the doorway again. Wendigo's not behind her this time. But it's like the same scene like 3 times back to back to back of people going in the doorway of the shed. Like, look at finally, we get to the very sad attempt at a twist ending. So as soon as her brother was impaled in the shed, I knew that he would become the new host, which again, we found out an hour earlier. We found out there's a new host. You had to rip its heart out. We found out everything in that scene, right? So I knew he was going to be the host. Again, could have found that out after the fact, and then you're like, who's the host, right? Is it the little kid? Is it the other kid? Is it the brother? Like, I knew he was the new host and that he was now going to become the Wendigo. And then they tried to throw you off. They're at the beach, right? And then there's a line from the brother and he's like, how can you love something when you know what it'll turn into, right? They're trying to fake us out. They're like, oh, the kid is the new Wendigo. No, I knew, no, absolutely not. And the kid is like some black stuff on his face. Still did not think it. I'm like, it's the brother. Like, it's gonna be him. And then what do you know? It was. And that's where it ends. So I predicted the ending and everything else for that matter. So if you're more curious about the interview with the director or some articles and things, I'll link it down below. There's 2 articles I'm gonna link down below. I did not think I would have this much to say about this movie, and I'm so disappointed because I was so excited about this movie, like so excited, and a part of me just was so hesitant to see it. Like, I was invited to an early screening, I didn't go, and I almost didn't go the day I went to see this, and I'm like, I'll just do it in the monthly recap, I'll watch it later. I just wasn't, something was holding me back, and now I know why. Just my intuition being like, that's a bad movie, don't waste your time or money. But here we are, here's a rant for you. Like I said, it has redeeming qualities. The setting, atmosphere, beautiful, gorgeous. The tone and everything of the movie, great. It's dark, I like that. But I just felt like it tried too hard to be something it wasn't, and that just really bothered me. Also, ironically, I'm reading this book right now, so if you want some decent Native American lore and, you know, written by an actual Native American, this is a great option. This is actually pretty scary and I'm really enjoying it. I'm almost done, kind of. Also, I get a lot of questions about books that I read and horror books. I will be doing a video at the end of the year on all the horror books that I have read this year and my reviews for all of them in one video. And then maybe in 2022, we'll start doing actual individual book reviews or like monthly recaps of books that I've read, maybe. Anyway, I would love to hear your thoughts on Antlers if you've seen it. It seems to be about 50-50 whether you liked it or didn't, or just kind of thought it was average. So I would love to hear more in depth your opinions in the comments. I hope you enjoyed this video and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.